about that, but there's a TED Talk someplace, and this guy is supposedly a Shaolin, that's how you say that, Shaolin monk. And he looks so like the perfect, he looks just like you want a Shaolin monk to look. He talks just, I mean, it's just absurd. And he says, oh, my master taught me that there was this young man, and he looked across every morning to this mountain, and he saw these pilgrims climbing the mountain. He said, one day I will climb the mountain, and one day. And so he goes to the mountain finally, and he talks to the pilgrims coming down. He says, well, how is climbing the mountain? They say, oh, it's amazing, but it's a lot of work. You got to get up there, but you know, it's extraordinary. And he says, well, I'll talk to another pilgrim. And so he talks to a lot of pilgrims. And he said, finally he decides, well, one, they all say it's hard, and they tell me what it's like at the top, so I don't need to climb the mountain, so I leave. And so here the Shaolin monk stops, and he says, well, my master said to me, you have to climb the mountain. And the audience is just enraptured by this story. And I'm like, well, that's just wrong. You don't know. That's like, no, that's exactly not the right story, right? But it is our story. We love that story, that you have to climb. Because if you don't climb the mountain, then something is wrong with you again. Back to the thing. The only way to prove that there's not something wrong with you is to climb the fucking mountain. And if you don't climb the mountain, then, which is not to say anything against mountain climbing. Hey, climb mountains, right? If you love to climb mountains, climb mountains. But it's the climbing of the mountain that should be the joy.
Joy, uh, I would differentiate joy and happiness in the following. Happiness comes from hap, which means chance. So happiness is more chancy. Joy is more, I would just call it innate. It's not really based on anything other than being really grateful to be alive. So happiness, like say I buy a new car and for a little while I'm happy, but joy doesn't need a car. Joy is beyond cars. So yeah, I happen to think that the play instinct, in we'll just say a toddler, the play instinct proves to me at least that joy is just innate. It's born. We're born with that. So it's kind of like when I think of the word birthright, it's the birthright, you know. And I could hear someone can argue and they'll go, well, rage is also innate. And I go, that's true too. That's your birthright too. Use it if you have to. But joy, it seems like joy is a good place to, a state of joy or the state of bliss seems to me like the ultimate.
What is joy and how is it different from happiness? So, because you said you were going to do this, I've been, pondering these sorts of things. And I think, to me, at least one way to conceptualize joy is it's the joie de vivre. It is, so that's the phrase I like, which means the joy of life. That life itself is some sort of excess or overflow. And so just being alive has this element of, wow, you are doing something amazing simply by being alive. Because you look at the universe, and strangely, there's two great deep questions about the universe. Why is there anything instead of nothing? Probably unanswerable. And then, given that there's anything at all, why is there life? So there has to be some strange, yet noticed or identified bias towards this thing that is, viability, life, living, and it's clearly an excess, right? It is the contradiction of the second law of thermodynamics, because we've sort of organized ourselves and become. And so to me, joie de vivre, is simply that, is the vitality of living. And happiness is to me is a much more variable there's times when you feel really great about being alive, and there's times when you feel less great about being alive. But you're still there. You still have it. I guess the joy is the ability to feel happiness, right, as well as other things, right? Just that possibility itself, to me, is like to remember that just being alive is just the greatest thing of all.
Another way to put it would be when you set up the computer, the default. You could call joy as the default setting. And again, I don't think that's anything. I don't think it's anything that unusual, because it's just natural state. Again, if you're a free person and you embrace truth and liberty and all, again, unless someone shows me something better, joy seems like it only makes sense. Like it's the only reasonable, well, I'm going to torture myself. Oh, another factor, not to be too babbly, but another factor is the temporary nature of time, our lifetime.
Right.
So that throws a whole nother, what in the hell are you doing if you're not having a good time? You know what I mean? Like because it's temporary. You just got this one shot. So what, you're going to torture yourself? You're going to torture yourself. That's good, dude. Let's do that. The world needs some more self-torturing. That's right.
I think we have an innate distrust of joy. We just don't believe it, right? People are always trying to convince me that pain and suffering are more real than joy. And so, which I just don't believe. I think this is a false idea. And so people don't look for joy because they just think, oh, you've got to be a serious person. Like a serious person is not interested in joy. They're interested in, making money or, having status, which is nothing wrong with those things, or I don't know, something else, goals or achievements of some kind. But you can do all that with a sense of joy. It's like, yeah, do that with joy. Well, like with an understanding sense of, yeah, this is all part of it. This is all an expression of my native vitality, rather than, oh, if I achieve this, I'm going to be miserable and feel badly while I do this, but when I get this will pay off all the misery and the badness that I felt. I think I'm very not sold on that. But I think if you go, oh, I want to do things in a way that makes me feel joyful and that expresses my sense of life and love of the world and love of myself, then who cares if you achieve the goal, right? Who cares if you climb the mountain or get the job or whatever the ostensible goal is. But I don't think we trust that. Somehow we've decided that if you do that, then you're unemployed and you live a sad, lonely life. I don't know. I don't know what the downside of living with joy is. I've never been clear on that, but it's pretty clear to me that people don't prioritize it because they don't trust it.
As far as I can tell, there's a social gravity, a downward against pure, untamed joy. And I can see it clearly when a kid, well, I experienced it when I'm 3 and 4 and I'm just playing until I drop. And then I went to kindergarten, and now we sit in desks. First grade, we sit in desks, anti-joy. Through and through. It's exactly what a 6-year-old doesn't need, is to sit in a desk. Now, I know we have to be taught to read in order to be part of the society, and math, I understand that and all, but that's just a demonstration of how joy is, I would call it taboo even, in this particular scenario. Meanwhile, selling you a little bit of so-called happiness, you see what I mean? We need, well, to keep this going, to keep this particular experiment going, we need people selling people happiness. Momentary, I sell you a new pair of shoes and you're happy for a little while. And hopefully you won't be happy too long, or the shoes will break apart. So you'll come back and keep it. And that's I think it's not only outdated, it's not a workable system. Because it doesn't work.
Right, because if everybody's joyful, then nobody has to buy this.
Exactly. See, that's the taboo part. If I'm living in a state of joy or bliss, then what are you going to sell me? You don't have anything to sell me. I already have it. You actually have it as well. See, that's the part that I think is funny. Everyone has it from the beginning. Funny, by the way, I should put it in quotes. It's not funny in the in the hilarious part. It's more like so weird. It's weird, and I think it's funny, but that's not. It's not a good attitude to take. I should feel sorry for people.
People seem to think that you have to have a job, and that part of having a job, regardless of what it is you have to dislike your job. Like disliking your job is part of the job. At least pretending to dislike your job is part of the job. And we are sort of dubious in theory of work. Like we want to avoid, labor-saving devices and, all this. And so work has kind of a bad name, and certainly jobs have a bad name. But again, I just, but why? I think a lot of people enjoy their jobs and just want to pretend that they don't. Because it's like, you're like, oh, I'm grinding it out. And I'm just like, if you're like, hey, this is great, I'm having, then people are like, hey, well, you don't take your job seriously. And it's like, yeah, exactly right. I don't take my job seriously because I'm enjoying it. Why would I? What's the point of taking it seriously? It's fun. I'm doing it in a joyful way. What needs serious? No, we're not going to do that, right? And so I believe that many people like their jobs much more than they will let on, because culturally we're conditioned to not to say that it's awful and a grind and terrible and I'm really sacrificing myself, and as opposed to just, and I think it's almost like we wouldn't earn the money, right? You shouldn't pay us if we're just like lolling around enjoying ourselves all day, which I think is just absurd. Have the joy, love the process, go with a light heart and get paid. Why not? Why the other? Which I think often is true. People really dislike it, but I think often is a sham. But yeah, because part of the vitality of living is we have excess energy. We want to do things. You don't see healthy kids not doing something. I mean, this is the problem, right? This is a big problem schools face, is trying to get the goddamn kids to sit still, which I think is completely wrong-headed. Don't get them doing stuff. And so we want to express that. We want to be active, and whether active is, some kids are quiet and want to read and chat, and some kids want to skip rope, and some kids want to paint, and some kids want to play football, and some kids want to, what they want to do is varied. But, they're always going. It's like this everybody complains about. They're always going. Like, yeah, no, that's humanity. So we want to go. We learn not to. And so work gets a bad name because we go, once you're trained not to do, then it's like, you're now doing seems like a violation somehow. And so it's like, no, so work is great if it's joyful work. It's not great if it's not. I mean, I guess that's probably a tautology, but if you can go in and enjoy the process, and not at every moment, but it's generally speaking, then yeah, it's what's the problem? But yeah, I think mostly we're trained not to think of it that way at all.
I mean, another way to put it is the simple word bullshit. Like you had to, like the suffering, I think a lot of us suffered when we were younger or now because of bullshit. You know what I mean? Like I think this I could be wrong. This is just an opinion, but I happen to think we also are born with bullshit detectors. Maybe even before we know words, before we have language. Like for example, let's say you're only one and you can only say mama and dada. I have a sense that you already have a little bit of, you have a little bullshit detector. For example, let's say your mom and they get into an argument. I think a 1-year-old can look and go, this is bullshit. Like he can look at it and go, fight, this is bullshit. So I think one of the first things that our society needs to do is smash that bullshit detector. And that's tough. Yeah, that's tough. To live out your truth and have your bullshit detector smashed is just a tough, you know what I mean? Like that's in some ways I think that's when the trouble begins. Because, well, if you were like me, then you're kind of like, oh, so I must be crazy because everyone else seems to be doing this. Like, for example, saying one thing and doing another. I remember by age 5 looking around and going, well, these people they're just liars, or I'm crazy because they're saying this and they're doing that. I have a hunch I wasn't the only one that, I mean, hypocrisy's another word. But this is old hat. It's the individual and then his society. And I happen to think they don't have to fight, but they need to, like the individual, I think, in order to be strong, does need to have, I guess, a very powerful bullshit detector, particularly against, on his own. He also, see, I mean, that's the hardest, is to look and see when I'm not living according to my words. Though that's the hardest stuff to see. You typically have to have really good friends to point it out to you.
Yeah, how does Christianity feed into our distrust of joy? I mean, you can look at the Bible is such a mishmash of everything, but the way it was interpreted and the way it, particularly with the Catholic Church and then Protestants, Calvinism and Protestantism generally, of course, is there's actually, I believe it's either Cotton Mather or his father, like Faith Mather, who said specifically, and I think it's a quote from Calvin actually, that if you're enjoying yourself, you're doing it wrong. Right, like that, like suffering is why you're here. And if you're not suffering, then God is going to punish you even worse. Right, which what a psychological mess that is. And so that sensibility of that life is about suffering. The world is fallen and terrible. And you're here to redeem, you have to be redeemed because there's something wrong with you. And so all of these tropes and notions really play against the flip side, which is to say, no, life is great. Being alive itself is fun and exuberant, and let's enjoy ourselves while we're here, and just embrace all of its crazy varieties. And yeah, this is not the Christian impulse at all. And so we're actually told joy culturally, again, and this is, even if you don't believe in a Christian, this is culturally so powerful, that joy is really probably a bad sign. And hence, you never hear about it in school, right? They never ask you in school what brings you joy. They never, when you go to work, joy is not a thing. You don't see CEOs saying, yeah, what a joyful quarter we had. Look, everybody, we're having fun. Just like, why not, right? But you're not supposed to articulate that as either a goal or something that's in fact happening.
Thing of, you were born and you're not enough, and you'll never be enough, and you owe. Crock of shit through and through. You didn't ask to be born. You actually don't owe anything unless you say you do, and once you get into debt, oh Jesus, well then now you actually literally owe. So you see what I mean? So it comes from a notion, and I do mean that, it's enlightenment. It's not ground on anything except someone said a long time ago and wrote it down that this God made you and you owe him for something. It's unclear to me, even though I've read the Bible 3 times, it's unclear to me how that is still a part of this whole thing. Like, it really is, it's a true, I almost want to pose it as a question. How is this still running things? It should have been, like, honestly, I look at them like, because again, I assume everyone knows their life on earth is temporary. So I assume if they created a God, they would create a God that's a good timing God. See, I don't get that. This is not a good timing God that we're talking about. So anyway, if we go to roots of things and look at that, as long as that is in the collective psyche of this society, that you're not enough and never will be. I mean, that's really the double part of it. then the problem with that is you get all sorts of other kooky notions then that follow it and keep the whole thing going. One of which is money's going to bring you happiness. How many times do we have to go through this? Meet a few rich people and then hang out with some poor folks and then come back and tell me which ones are. If money had much to do with happiness at all, then the richer you got, the happier you'd be. I don't find that to be the case. Even when you look at pictures of billionaires, by the way, I know I flipped happy and joy and those things. That said, the individual, this is up to the individual. If an individual needs $1 million a year and he's living in joy, I don't have a problem with, like, whatever you need to be in joy. My guess is something's amiss. But hey, it's a free country for now. It's going to be a free country. Anyway, really look into your beliefs and test them. See if they hold water. Like the belief in an afterlife. Let's explore that a little bit. Okay, maybe. But the problem, let's call them metaphysical views. As I see it is, again, if you're a free human being, choose your metaphysical views. And choose them, I think you should choose them wisely because they will affect your life from now on, right? So look into them and really test them out. Like, here's an example. When I was a kid in the church, they taught us that there was this place called hell where you went if you didn't have Jesus. And I think I was 6 or 7, and I was in Sunday school. The teacher's name was Miss Dominic, as I recall. But anyway, I could not make sense of that. Like that Jesus loves me, and that God is good, and if I didn't believe that, I'd go to hell. Like, for some reason, my bullshit detector, see, the problem is mine wasn't yet stamped down. It was still in there, and I called bullshit. And I said, well, so I go to hell for eternity if I don't believe in Jesus, but I won't have a body. So how is that a problem? I remember asking her that, like, raise my hand because I had burned my finger. Every kid has burned his finger, and I'm like, yeah, but with no body, how is that painful? You see what I mean? And it was and she didn't respond to that. In fact, I didn't have to go to Sunday school anymore. Yeah, it turns out she talked to my parents. I never had to go back. It was really. So let's see, where were we? Oh, so anyway, so belief, the individual, his beliefs or her beliefs, I think they need, like, really revise them if they're not working for you. See, again, what is working for you, only you will know. You set up your values, and then if your life is, I would say, continually going in alignment with those values, then I'd say right on. You probably don't need much tuning at all. But if you find that there's just clash and you're not even close to what you claim to be your values, then test stuff. There is one Bible verse. There are a couple, in all fairness, that are decent. But one in particular that I think, if they'd only taught me this when I was about 10 in Sunday school or whatever it was, 9, and it's in Thessalonians, you'd have to look it up. Test all things, hold to that which is good. See, now that's a perfectly, I'll go with that. Let's go with that. I would have just dropped out of Sunday school immediately. Because I don't, again, it's like, invent a God. If you have to have a God, invent one that actually works for you. Not one that's just an ongoing. It's just like, you know what I mean? Like, make a good one. And this is almost embarrassing to admit. For a while, I thought about, well, I'll just turn joy into a god or goddess, whatever, like an ultimate being, and then I'll make a sacred text You see what I mean? This is silly, but I would call it either Jehovah or Joyce's. I'm definitely in big trouble for those. I'm sure. Blasphemy. I can feel the hellfire is just they're putting like extra coal or whatever they're using for fuel. Anyway, it's really silly. All of it excuses not to live your natural state.
Yeah, fear and leadership and the narratives of fear that we're sort of inundated with. And fear itself is not bad, by the way. I mean, if you stand on a cliff and you fear falling, hey, that's survival fear, right? But what's happened, of course, is we rarely face those sorts of threats or dangers in our environment in the modern world. So, but our fear responses come from a world in which there was these things. So in the modern world, politicians, leaders, marketers, all kinds of environmental narratives that we encounter trigger those sort of baseline fear for things that have no association with them, right? Like it just doesn't make sense. So fear, I think, in some ways is almost the opposite. That sort of dis-ease, that sort of undermining of your sense of capacity, vitality, and being, making you feel threatened all the time is a way of damping down joy. I really think that this is, because if joy is the sense of being alive, trying to convince people that is under threat all the time when it's not, it's 99.9% of the time our fears are simply culturally conditioned. That we don't have lions that are going to pounce on us and eat us. We don't. The stock market going down doesn't mean we're going to starve to death. These sorts of fears that people have that are innate. They trigger those feelings even though they aren't. It's not accurate. And so most of our fears, I think don't make sense. The example I like to use is people say, "Oh, I'm afraid of losing, my house, or I'm afraid of losing something, right? My car or my savings." And I'm like, hey, you should not fear that, because you're 100% guaranteed to lose that, because we all die, right? You are 100% going to lose everything you have. So don't worry about that. You can just check that worry off your list, because it's going to happen. The question is when and under what circumstances. And so fearing that makes no sense. It's basically a denial of the transience of life, and saying, okay, so work backwards from there. What are the real downsides to things? Is the real threat or fear? Now it might be unpleasant. You don't want to go through losing your house. You don't want to go to all these, which makes perfect sense. So I'm totally for that. But being conditioned by those fears means that you're you don't want to express your vitality because you feel like it's under threat. Like, oh, I got to save it. I've got to keep it under wraps. I don't want people to know, or these sorts of emotions, I think, are consistent. And so I think fear, it's sort of a cliche, but somebody said everything that you want is on the other side of fear. And I'm like, yeah, there's a certain amount of that I really believe. I'm like, yeah, if you can just sit with the fear and go, is this a real fear? What are the actual downsides? If you think about it, 99% of the time. Sometimes, yeah, there's some, but you're like, yeah, there's really not that much at stake, really. That's core. And so, yeah, maybe do it.
The biggest problem I see is it comes from ancient Chinese and Greek, and I'm not sure which came up with it first, doesn't really matter. But the line is something like, most people live as if they had 1,000 years. And there's some real truth to that. Like what are you postponing? I'm making a pretend person I'm talking to, right? You told me you're into truth. You don't have 1,000 years. I can tell you that. I'm no genius, but I'm betting 100 years, 110 max. By the way, I think it'd be fun to have almost like a odometer, basically, that shows you about how much more time you have left. and really has it down.
Like I said, I like to backpack. I like to wander about in the woods. Backpacking is too an exaggeration of what I do. Um, but here we're in the Olympics. Every hike begins the same way, which is uphill because it's just a big ass mountain range, and you start at the ground and you go up. And and I'm not really all that fond of hiking straight uphill, but there you go. That's the way it's going to be because that's the way we live. And so knowing that, it just doesn't, I mean, it's work. And sometimes I think, what am I doing? Right. And all of that. And it's, again, am I happy? No, but I feel so damn good. Right. It's not like, oh, this is great. This is pleasant. It's just like, oh man, it's vital, in part because it is uphill. I mean, it's the weirdness of uphill is part of it. And so, yeah, happiness I see as this much more variable um, notion. And I think I like to think of happiness also as being having a certain unknown component to it, that it sort of surprises you. And you're all of a sudden like, oh, this is just surprisingly wonderful and great. And I feel happy. Whereas I think joy is a much more baseline, um, like, yeah, whatever happens today, it's going to be good. It's going to be part of of living.
The kid, we'll just say it starts off early. He's very sensitive to input, uh, maybe even literally, like he hears sounds more. I know people that if a guitar's out of tune, it hurts them. Like that's not uncommon. Like that's how sensitive they are. They're sensitive to senses, all the senses, um, and they're also intelligent. And those two. So basically, when your intelligence gets just brutalized, when your deepest your way of being in the world that was your natural state, when that just gets stomped on, like just constantly, well, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, and it was what you held most dearly. I just think that that's set up for just horrible addictions. It's the injustice is so deep. And then if we'll just say if he doesn't have a way to counter that, if drugs or alcohol or whatever, if that's his way of countering that, there's not enough beer in the world or whatever. There's not enough heroin in the world to counter that force. It has to be a change of view. I think that's the only, maybe that's a better way to put it. The addict, the ones that, the real addicts, my guess is it's the savior for them would be a change of view. I don't want to be trite about this because again, I've been through a lot of stuff, and so it's not simple like that. Well, let's take that back. It's simple, but for some reason we make it so complex. And again, I think now I'm talking about the society. We as a society are invested in having addicts and all the rest. You know what I mean? Like in order to keep this one going, we have to have lots of law enforcement, lots of prisons, addicts, and all the rest of that. Because it's a sad system. Not overall, but a couple of the roots are sad. They're outdated. They're unnecessary. This is what I mean by the view. It really is just a change of view. All the individual, if he just suddenly goes, wait, I actually don't have to do it that way anymore. It can, like honestly, one of the Zen guys, I think he said something like, it can take 30 years or it can take 30 seconds. And I mean that.
Yeah, a lot of emphasis put on everything that's wrong with our society, which is amazing considering we live in what is unarguably the best time ever to be alive, best time, best place. I know this will be shocking to people to think that way, but you just can't find a historical measure that makes me think this is not true. So what are the great aspects of being alive in 2021 that help feed joy? One is opportunity. We've never had so much opportunity for being. Like, how many ways, how many, I mean, it used to be that what interfered with people's joy was starving to death. That really, really does undercut your sense of joy and vitality, because you die slowly and painfully. So that's bad. But that was I mean, the number is amazing, but before 1800, roughly, I mean, it's hard to get exact data, but it looks like, I mean, conservatively, 80% of the world's population was subject to endemic hunger, which meant you would not every once in a while, but consistently through your life, face periods of starvation, and serious food shortage like that might kill you. 80 plus percentage of the world's population. So that meant if you lived, say, 50 years, which would be a long time, maybe, 20 of those years you went seriously hungry. I mean, imagine that. Like, and so this is not good. And then you knew people who starved to death because if you got sick, you didn't have enough food, you would just die, not because the disease was so bad, but because you just didn't have the resources. It would just kill you. So, yeah. So we live in a time when those sorts of fears are very remote for 80 plus percent. We reverse that. It's 20% of the world's population still has these, concerns. 80%, yeah, not so much, and particularly in the United States. So if you're hungry in the United States, something else has gone wrong. I mean, because there is food out there. So you're really talking about opportunities and freedoms based on you really don't have to worry about some of these truly fundamental aspects of existence anymore. Those fears theoretically should be gone. They aren't gone, but they theoretically should be gone. We also live longer and healthier. I mean, there's all this discussion about diet and exercise and everyone's obese and yeah, yes, absolutely. We get it. I get it. But fundamentally, we have this very great life expectancy and we expect to live pretty damn healthfully for that period. And so, historically, life expectancy, which is a tricky thing to figure out again exactly, but 50 was old. 50 was an advanced age. 60 was ancient. Goethe lived to 70 something, and everybody just thought it was an embarrassment that anybody could live that long and be relatively healthy that time. They were like, this is just basically unheard of. I mean, he became this kind of living icon because he had lived famous, but also lived so long. I mean, it was just weird. And now, I think median life expectancy is 76 or something like that in the United States. Anyway, it's around there. And you go, wow, I mean, so we get almost double the life. Like, we get 2 lives. I mean, how fucking outrageously cool is 2 lives? I mean, that's like the best thing ever. Yeah, no. And again, you can talk about racism, but it's the best time, if you're African American, this is the best time to be in the United States by far, not even close. I mean, this is just absurd. We're going to be in the 50s? I don't think so. Lynchings look less than appealing. These types of issues. If you're a woman, by far, I mean, wow, never educational opportunities, career opportunities. And I always think of my mom, who, if she had had the kinds of opportunities that young women have today, her life would have been transformed completely because she's an amazing athlete, phenomenal athlete at a time when women just didn't have not zero, but almost zero opportunities to pursue athletics. If she were going into college today, she would be on scholarship anywhere she wanted, and her life would be down a whole different track. And so that sort of elements to think about. The flip side of that, unfortunately, is people don't know what to do with all that opportunity, right? And so if you have more freedom, it opens up the possibility of more fear. And then, of course, like you said, the leaders injecting fear into us, marketing injecting fear into us, and so it makes us weirdly more susceptible to this psychological kind of torture of trying to keep people agitated and nervous and uncertain, because freedom is uncertainty. I mean, that's, another way of saying freedom is, oh, you've got uncertainty. Because if you don't have uncertainty, you don't have freedom. If you know everything, you're not free. If you don't know everything, you have freedom. That uncertainty tends to breed discontent, fear, anxiety, all the things that are negative. And so, but if you can overcome that, and so, hey, wait, these are wonderful problems. I mean, it's really a great problem to have these levels of uncertainty. And we don't like them for some reason. I mean, I don't know why we don't like them, but it makes sense not to like them, but we should embrace them. And if you, again, if you go back to the sense of joy, if you have a sense of joy, then the uncertainty doesn't unnerve you. Then you're like, hey, this is great. I'm going to be great because life is wonderful and here's all these opportunities. So, yeah. If you don't feel that, oh, I'm a bad person already, I shouldn't trust myself, and I'm faced with all this uncertainty, well, yeah, now of course you feel terrible because you already feel like you're in a bad shape and you don't know what to do and you don't trust yourself and you think you're and then that just feeds in that cycle. So getting out of that sensibility, I think, and that's why it says clarity. It's what keeps you from joy is clarity. Period. I think more or less is if you're clear about things, you probably should be joyful. Even though, again, life is wavy, not happy all the time, but you can have that sense of vitality.
All I've done is just gotten back to where I was. So now, mind you, there are catastrophes. And to think that I'm in a state of joy in the middle of a catastrophe, or say someone I know is going through hard times or whatever, that's not what I'm talking about. That's I can even be depressed, as weird as that sounds, but the state of joy is the base. So depression going through me, it's a fluid thing. So you go through the depression and all that, but that's not my state. That's not where I live. I don't live in depression. I live in joy. And then depressions come and go, or whatever. I could get good and mad at something or someone too, but it goes through.